and let people trickle in. We're having some problem with the video, but you'll see it at some point. Uh, so, I'm from Mark, and Mark has been around for about 80 years, but we've never done an issue on video games up until now. And we're very glad that we had Dr. Souvik Mukherjee guide us through it, because we had so many ideas about it, and he brought us up to show that, no, I'll figure this out later. So that was great. And it's called Video Games Lila Maya, because I think one of the things that we have done is we've looked at games earlier. We've looked at Indian games, we've looked at Indian board games, and a lot of them deal with this sort of question about how play leads you into an illusionary space where it has its own rules, it has its own logic, and that's not really true of the real world necessarily. And that's been theorized for games, video games as well. So it's a nice continuation, we think. But I'm going to let these guys speak. So starting with Dr. Souvik Mukherjee. He's the Associate Professor in Cultural Studies at the Center for Studies in Social Sciences, Kolkata, and a pioneering games research, game studies researcher from the Indian subcontinent. His research looks at video games and storytelling, video games as colonial and post-colonial media, and gaming cultures in the Indian subcontinent. He's the author of 3 monographs, which you all should check out later. Video games and storytelling, video games and post-colonialism, and video games of the Indian subcontinent. He's also looking at Indian board games and colonialism, which is why he has actually looked at the earlier marks. He was named a DIGRA Distinguished Scholar in 2019 by the Digital Games Research Association and a Higher Education Video Games Alliance Fellow in 2022. He is also an affiliated Senior Research Fellow at the Center of Excellence Game Studies at the University of Tampere in Finland. Dr. Padmini Murray, who unfortunately could not write for a volume, but we've got her here to tell us more about video games, is a feminist researcher, maker, and the founder of Design Beku, a collective of researchers, artists, technologists, and designers who work towards making design and digital practice more locally rooted. I'm sorry. Yes, locally rooted is also and community. I'm going to read all this out. Contextually relevant and ethical. She creates researches and writes about games and interactive media when she has the time and space to do so, and is keen to infuse those same values in the digital work that she creates. And we may have a few examples of that in the volume, so you can take a look at that. And finally, Prabhash Tripathy is a PhD scholar at the School of Arts and Aesthetics at Jawaharlal University, New Delhi. He was a doctoral fellow at the International Research Center in Creating Performance Cultures, Freie University, Berlin. His MPhil dissertation was an ethnographic study of early video game parlors in Delhi and Missouri. He has also contributed to the volume, so you can read his essay later. So over to you.
So thanks a lot, Josna. Thank you all for being here, and thank you, Padmini, thank you, Prabhash, for joining me here. First of all, I'd just like to tell you a little bit about this volume, the special issue. My connection with Mark begins way back because Mark produced this fantastic book called The Art of Play. It's not just a book, it's like an artwork in itself. It's on board games in India, aided by the redoubtable board game scholar Andrew Topsfield. And then it also produced another volume on kind of board game artifacts in India, and featured Krishnaraja Wadeyar's kind of board games, which is very close to our hearts here in Karnataka, and specifically also from Mysore. So basically, that kind of captured my kind of imagination. And then when Jyotsna kind of contacted me and said that can we do a special issue on video games, I was like, oh my God, this is fascinating. Because to bring, first of all, to bring games into the realm of art was something which is, I think, is a big leap. It's not so much a big leap elsewhere, but it is here, I will say, where academia, historians, social scientists kind of shy away from dealing with games per se, unless it is cricket. As you will see, a lot of kind of cricket books there on the bookshelf here as well. So maybe chess, but no, not even that. But with video games, there was this kind of question. There's also this question. Again, games often kind of get infantilized, made like they're children's things. Board games are things that children play. Video games children play, and yeah. So just like George Bush had once commented about MTV teeny bopper, video teeny bopper music. It was like kind of teeny bopper kind of games, but it's not like that. It's just there is so much in games. And there was this really famous kind of debate, are video games art, which was kind of like posed, well, Roger Ebert, who was this film critic, eminent film critic, late eminent film critic, he just said video games are not art, they cannot be art. And there was this whole kind of debate around it. And certainly kind of, when one looks at video games made in India recently and also in the past, there is this question that emerges, and where are the contours, the boundaries of art, quote unquote, who does the gatekeeping and what have you. And what then we kind of talked about, Jyotsna and I, and in a really lively meeting in Calcutta Book Fair with lots of people kind of shouting around us in the Marg stall, was that yes, let's kind of place it in a certain, and there were many ideas, and yes, I did shoot down a few, but then it was like depending on what was possible, basically to look at different kind of commentators on video games in India. Mind you, video games kind of happened around the 90s-ish in India. They're also there earlier. We're playing on our Ataris, which our neighbors' kids have brought or whatever. But that's happening there. So we have people like Casey O'Donnell, who writes a really early kind of review. He came here on a Fulbright scholarship. And then there is kind of obviously somebody who, there are obviously other people who are writing, and there are curators of kind of games who are writing. Then there are kind of, and I did kind of, at that time I contacted Padmini, and when Jyotsna mentioned pioneer, Padmini is also a pioneer in kind of developing Indian games in India, really, and there's some fascinating articles by her as well as kind of games. I'll let you find those out, really. And she also introduced me to the kavad, which is a wonderful metaphor for games, I think, and she's also worked on it. Let me, she has her own thunder. I shan't steal it. But then the thing is, then where we came to was this idea also of kind of having both experienced old fogies like me now, researchers as well as early career researchers, people who are starting with very new ideas such as Prabhash, and people who are just about even doing their PhDs right now. They have all these cool new ideas. They're playing more games than I can ever dream of. And then also practitioners and people who are actually focusing on certain kind of aspects of Indian culture. For example, Zinnia Zeiler works on the Durga Puja and games, and then now the Durga Puja has been made a UNESCO, so there's all kinds of those links there. And so we also kind of focused on this game called Raji, which is also really lush and beautiful and kind of, so we've kind of covered, we've tried to do a kind of sort of cover more or less video games happening in India, but also to explore critically how questions of art may be addressed in these video games. And of course, I know that my fellow panelists will also say this at some, but this whole idea that video games can be, there is this whole kind of notion, like I said, to be infantilized or kind of thought that they're just games, or they're violent, or video games are PUBG or whatever, So there are, obviously, it's just like saying that books are violent, or like books are great. Game is a really multiple media, right? There are so many different types. So that kind of nuance needs to come across. I hope it has in this special issue, and I hope there will be many more. To sort of, this probably would be a launch pad for further kind of commentary. But looking at games which are made abroad, like Papers, Please, which is about kind of this person being, you are the person who has the power to grant access to the country or not, basically stamp on the passport, and there's all kinds of political, and I can see some people smiling there, yeah. Or Fold It, which is about kind of making protein sequences, which actually resulted in the solution of a kind of medical problem. Or let's say something like Attentat 1942, which is about kind of, when Reinhard Heydrich kind of was assassinated in Czechoslovakia, then an entire village was kind of so decimated by the Nazis, but then there's this whole kind of history that's developing there. So all of these are not kind of certainly just the PUBG wala issue. So that's the thing. So there are so many nuances here in video games. And of course, art, and if you look at what is called AAA video games, which are like more mainstream video games, blockbusters, I mean, there is some fascinating art in some of those as well. And there's so many people who are involved in making these. And really, I'm just kind of really, I have to say this, the name of this game. I know most of you wouldn't probably have played it. It's called Red Dead Redemption. And it is just one of the most beautiful games that I kind of spend my life in. I do not fight. I do not do anything. I have a horse. I ride it around the Wild West, and I just stand there. So, and hopefully we'll have more here in India, and we have more scope for discussion, at which I know I'll kind of now, stop here and just say that what Mark has done, I think, is kind of a watershed thing, because this will let other kind of, the discourse kind of happen, and has brought this into more or less, it's kind of forced this into a more mainstream kind of thing. People have to now talk about it. Like the other day I went to Loreto College, Calcutta, and it's like very conservative there, and I saw this volume in the library, and I said, oh, I edited it, and this is a Mark volume. And the person, librarian, said, you mean the volume on tattoos? I said, no, video games. this is there it is. It's just there. Yeah, well, yeah, so there we go. True, but still, now video games are kind of replacing tattoos. So there you go. So I'll kind of pass on the baton to Prabhash, who's written for the special issue, and maybe you can tell us what you think about kind of your contribution and how you see yourself.
Yeah, as I am an early career researcher, so I wouldn't have many answers for you, but I would think with you. Yeah. So more questions. When Souvik told me that Marg is publishing an edition on video games, I was very surprised, because I was like, okay, that's great. I do want to contribute, but there were important questions there that video games have always been close to art. I mean, like, art is indispensable to video games, but they've always been close, but what does this closing in means? Does it mean a closing in of two institutions, that is institution of video game and the institution of art? Does that mean video games have become an institution? And in that case, have we moved from forms of expression coming together in order to be powerful to another phase where powerful forms are coming together? It's an interesting movement, and that movement has to be thought about more carefully. What does it mean? What is the politics of it? And now it's also like, why do video games want to be art? That is one of the questions that I start my essay with. Why do video games want to be art? Sports doesn't want to be art. Board games don't want to be art. What would video games gain by gaining a status of art? And the debate that Souvik just mentioned, that it's always been a thing, that video games are art or not. But the question is moot in the sense, like, we probably who wants video games to be art is, it can only be, the entire thing can only be framed through a perspective of power. So I would want Padmini to, or Padmini and Souvik both to respond to this change between art, the connection between art and video games, and the institution of art and video games. That's it.
Okay, thanks
Yeah.
for lobbing that to me. But yeah, so I think I mean, I'm not very sure how familiar people are with the kind of, I would say the kind of academic, for want of a better word, thinking about games. But very roughly speaking, I mean, there's game studies, which is now quite a well-established discipline. There aren't that many institutions in India that do game studies. It's much more likely that you have design colleges that are teaching game design. But game studies is kind of, I guess, where Souvik and my work kind of falls. And I think what has been interesting to see is this kind of, formalization, and as Prabhash was saying, the recognition, and in a sense, a kind of a weird kind of institutionalization of the world of games. But I think it's also about, a lot of this is also about the market, right? Like, so as Souvik was mentioning, like talking about like AAA games, India traditionally was actually the labor behind AAA games. So Casey's work, Casey O'Donnell, he wrote a fantastic book.
Developers Deliver.
Yeah, like 2006, 2007, like long time ago, about kind of what it meant to be working for Ubisoft and all of these kind of big studios that had like kind of basically outsourced work here. And but what that meant, and that was actually kind of my jumping off point when I came to India for the first time to work on games in around 2012, which is that obviously if you are, if these major studios are outsourcing labor to this country, then clearly there is the technical talent to make games here. So why is it that we have not seen intellectual property emerging from India, like interesting new video game properties coming out in any kind of way? So when I came to India to do that work, I spoke to people, some of whom were still working in Ubisoft or EA, etc. And some people who were the very, very, I think would say like the first generation of indie game developers in India, all of whom had had some success, but that success just could not be sustained because there was no kind of recognition for what they were doing. NASSCOM was interested, but there was no money, there was no kind of support. So in most other countries, kind of Scandinavian countries or Canada, the art scene or the indie game scene is completely subsidized by the government, or largely subsidized by the government, which is just not the case here. So therefore we had like, I think kind of several stops and starts for Indian games to kind of launch themselves onto the world. And I think there's always been this kind of mythology, and I guess pun intended, that because India has these kind of mega epic narratives like Mahabharata and Ramayana, that that can be made into some kind of blockbuster video game. There have been a few attempts, all of which I think are fairly disastrous. And I mean, there are so many other stories that India has. And so I think that was a bit of a red herring, and so that didn't take us anywhere as well. So I think what happened was that we did start seeing artists also turning towards making games. So Afra Shafiq, who's written in this book, her games are fantastic, and she's an artist. Gayatri Kodikal as well, who's another amazing feminist game.
Dhruv Chani.
And Dhruv, like they all were in the art game kind of space, and so the recognition that they were getting was largely from museums and galleries, rather than from just kind of the average player, right? So what that does mean is that there is a space for that kind of art game, or serious game as they're called, in the world and in the art world for sure. I mean, I think Afra's got work got acquired by the Guggenheim. Like, she's like in the high art realm now. So I see the relationship between that kind of, I guess, that mark tag and the way we think about games. But I think in India, like the mass of games is gambling, parking simulation, and like Candy Crush or that ilk of game, right? Sorry.
Parking simulation.
Yep.
Do not even
Think about it.
So
Never said
I remember, so I went to GDC a couple of years ago to speak, and they have like a in-house competition of like the younger, the new batch of game makers, and the one that won, and I was so stunned because everyone like cheered and so on. Was it train parking, shunting, whatever trains do when they get parked. That game. So yeah. So it's a huge market. But also I think what has been really interesting is the emergence of the woman player above 55, right? Like the whole kind of Candy Crush generation. And what has that meant for the iconography of games? What has that meant for the way that games are thought about in India, right? Like because we had our Farmville moment where we were like, we must have our flag. And, you know, all of that. So, and so for me, it was interesting because I actually came to games first through making games. So I was working with Quicksand, which is a design agency, to make what we had actually been given funding, lo and behold, by the British government, to make what they were saying or calling an Indian video game. And then, so this brought up really interesting questions like what does India even mean? Like it's like
exactly.
a fucking cipher, right? Like, you know, so, and I mean, Souvik has written beautifully on like kind of decolonial kind of ways of thinking about how India is depicted in games. So I think one way to think about it is if I'm making an Indian video game, there is obviously kind of a less colonial gaze, but at the end of the day, it is still going to be quite a very Hindu, very Savarna kind of version of a certain kind of incredible India, right? Like for it to be recognizably Indian. And I think that has slowly shifted. Like, who was the lot who were doing that detective game? I think it never took off, with the black and white one.
Not Detective Dodson. No, that's not it.
No.
It's a new one.
Yeah, it was a couple of years ago anyway. There was this group of developers, obviously, unfortunately, it didn't take off. But they were doing this kind of noir, detective noir thing.
I know.
You know which one I mean, right?
Yeah.
And so, even though it was set in India, it could be anywhere, right? Like it wasn't, the story itself was not necessarily kind of about being in India. But I think something that Souvik and I did really early on, which was really interesting, is that we did a survey of video game players, asking them, like, have you ever seen India in the games that you play? If you saw India, and these were only Indian gamers, if you saw India in a video game, what would you expect it to look like? So yeah, and it was really really fascinating how they had not even really, it was not in their imagination at all, and so that was, you know, quite an interesting kind of way of thinking about it. But yeah, and so now I think India has obviously a relatively healthy gaming market. There are companies who keep claiming to be making the next AAA game. I mean, in a way, it's not surprising because we're also the country of Bollywood, right? And a Bollywood blockbuster and a AAA game are actually very similar in terms of scope and in terms of expense, etc. So it might still happen. But indie games, I think the kind of watershed moment in indie games in the rest of the world was when you know, things like Game Master became very easy to do. Unity had a free edition that you could just learn and do. And so it really lowered the barrier to making games. Things like Twine came into the market, so you could just, you know, build your own narrative. So I think in that sense, games became really democratized, and then there was also a marketplace for it by way of, not Switch.
Itch.io.
Not Itch. Itch also?
Yeah.
What's the other?
Not Switch.
Steam.
Steam.
I was like, smoke.
Yeah.
I'm in my 40s, guys. It's all going down. So Steam.
Yeah.
So because of that, there was a space for these games to be sold, and therefore to find an audience. And I think there was this kind of, you know, glorious Steam moment, but unfortunately that has also begun to fall by the wayside. But yeah, I mean, I think I do when I speak to young people. So I used to teach at Trishti, and I used to teach game design and narrative design, and I do see people coming up with some really new and you know, fresh ideas. Kunal is here, who's doing something really cool. You can catch him later to talk about it, but just in terms of games aesthetic, it looks completely different from anything I've ever seen. You know, thematically as well. So, I mean, there's lots of interesting kind of work happening with younger. There's one very successful game studio called Fishbowl Studio, who've been winning prizes all over the world in the indie game space. And what I think is really interesting is the aesthetic of that game is like this very kawaii aesthetic, but it's kawaii 8-bit, but it's in India. So yeah, so they've done a really good job of kind of creating this seamless world. So I do think it's a promising moment for Indian video games. I think we could do with a lot more support. I think we could do with a lot more just help and space. Like, I think at one point, I think Neil Chaudhary and I were talking, so Neil is a dramaturg, but he's also made games. And we were like, there's no residencies for people to make games in India. Like, just having...
There were coach residencies.
There were the coach residencies, and that was it. Like, you know, and those are like a handful every few years. And so it would be so nice to have more residencies. Like, there are tons of writers' residencies now, right? Like, so would it can we have like a video game residency? So I feel like that would be a good way to kind of take the space forward. But yeah, I'll stop there.
Yeah, so thanks a lot, Padmini. Thanks a lot, Prabhash. I'm just going to pitch into what both of them saying. And one of the things is, by the way, incidentally, the curator of the Coach Residencies, Pooja Sood, has written for this kind of volume. So you can actually find out about what their thinking was going on there. One thing I'm personally kind of involved in now, there is actually an Indian government funded kind of there's the funding. It is called the SERB has now changed. The name is changed, and I don't have internet, so I can't look it up. SERB INAE funding for developing games on Indian heritage. And there is actually, I'm actually now working with two game developers, Mala Sen and Mridul Kshatriya, on making this game called Palace on the Hill. So there is kind of some light at the end of the tunnel in that sense. But then again, India has often been called the sleeping giant of video games and blah blah. But that really, the sleeping giant, if it is a sleeping giant, has been sleeping for a long time, right? Bless you.
Sleeping uncontroversial.
Uncontroversial. Oh well, again, but still sleeping. But so let's see where what happens. Now we have seen, and she's mentioned Afra, who's written for this volume. Afra makes some fascinating games. Incidentally, Afra's previous work was Sultana's Reality, which is on Begum Rokeya Shakwa, but she actually drew a lot from the CCCC archives, CCCC where I work. But that's not really a game; it's more kind of online kind of. But then Afra has worked on kind of some other really fascinating, and the game that she has made, really, it's about. It's about reading Russian books when I grew up on those books, right? And this is it's such a beautiful kind of way of the game is called Nobody Knows for Certain, and I really recommend that it's available. And I wanted to, because I mentioned itch.io, this site itch.io actually allows people to pitch their games, kind of indie games. So one of my students has just recently made a game on the freedom struggle, and he cited the whole game in the red light area of Kolkata, and he's got this kind of really fascinating kind of British officer investigating, and there's another narrative. So he's just made it in Twine, and he's put it on itch.io, and he's getting lots of responses. So this is that there is this kind of possibility here. So I'm just saying, just as video games are defined by many game studies scholars as spaces of possibilities, I'm also saying that in this scenario, video games in India is also, there is a space of possibilities. I'm still not saying the sleeping giant is awake. The other thing, to come to it, I now mainly work on board games. I've worked on video games for over 20 years. You know what happens when you work on something for 20 years, which is why my t-shirt shows what I work on. But having said that, I think some of the, I will disagree with Prabhash here slightly, that some of the most interesting kind of, board games have been connected to art. Like I'm sure you've heard of Marcel Duchamp. Marcel Duchamp went a little batty later on. He wanted to be a chess grandmaster. So you will see, there is one chess set I want to buy, which is the Duchamp chess set. I've seen it in the Met Museum. They're selling. It's a fascinating, beautiful chess set, really. And if you see how Indian chess sets are made or board games are made, you see the art there. Of course, you don't have a name tag to it like Marcel Duchamp. For example, Salvador Dali made playing cards. So there is this whole idea of kind of weaving in. Now, then the question, of course, arises: where is the ludic? Where is the playful in the art? Is it just art, or is there play? And that is something that one needs to kind of think about, really. But I will end my I have a small museum on board games back in Kolkata home, and I have a Bauhaus chess set. And the Bauhaus chess set is fascinating because the pieces are the rules of the moves, basically. So you have that, which is the bishop, and that which is the knight, and a block, which is the. So you see, then you have the mechanics in the art itself, and that's just a cool example that I just kind of thought of. But I also want to say, for example, do you know what the original was of Snakes and Ladders? Everybody's played Snakes and Ladders, right? It was called Gyan Chopad or Moksha Pat. And it was actually from here, these parts, and you have this beautiful kind of game sets, which kind of actually are about your karmic life, but they're really beautifully painted. And so, are they art objects? Are they games? And this question is actually very beautifully brought in video games, really, because you actually play through the art. Just as, I mean, and she mentioned Afra, and I just saw that nobody knows for certain, because it is really art that you're navigating through. I mean, literally. So there you go. And I no wonders why Guggenheim has it there, really, in there. So.
Very quickly say, like, just because you brought up the karmic thing, I think something that Souvik and I started thinking about early on was also the kind of storytelling that, you know, in the West, as opposed to the way that we think about kind of circular narrative in kind of, I guess, Eastern philosophy and South Asian kind of ways of thinking about the world. And so that's also been interesting to think about, like, how people have incorporated that. So I don't know how many people have played Journey, but yeah, Journey has that kind of, you know, circularity as opposed to this very kind of beginning and end thing. And it's been quite interesting to me to see many kind of games outside South Asia kind of start using that kind of mechanic. So yeah, so that's kind of one way to kind of, so actually coming back to this idea of what is an Indian game, what the reason why I just brought this up is that it doesn't have to always be about artifact. It can be about you know, kind of a philosophical conversation that emerges from this region, or something about language, right? Like there's so much scope to kind of pull that apart and do interesting things with it. Do we want to start taking questions?
Or maybe
Prabhash,
just kind of add, you know, just yeah.
I just wanted to build upon that only. That what is this Indian game? I mean,
this is what I was about to ask you.
Does the constitution apply in the game? what exactly?
Shasan, I guess.
Yeah, Shasan. That's a board game, but yeah.
I mean, that's what always. I mean, like video games in India, I understand whatever is played. But what is an Indian game, and why are we pushing towards it to begin with? I mean, like every time it's, I mean, like the games, like what about Bharatvarsh?
That is the new AAA thing, right?
Yeah, AAA thing. It's always like indigenization first before we work on gameplay. So it's kind of, it becomes problematic. And more than anything, I think Indian games, like whatever is produced in India, especially the AAA titles, they do need technical testing, and plus they need something called as ethical testing, because they're ethically really a problem. So yeah, I'll close there.
No, but like Darshan Diversion technically is an Indian game. So I made this game in 2016, which has not been published for very obvious reasons, and I will explain why. So basically, it was a game about the Sabarmati?
No, Sabarimala.
I swear it was It was about the Sabarimala controversy, and it was made during a global game jam. And basically, as if you've ever been in a hackathon or a jam, you will know that, like say it's a 48-hour jam, till the like 27th hour, you're like, I don't know what the fuck I'm gonna do. And I was like reading the newspaper, and there was this story about, because that was the point at which the Sabarimala temple was surrounded by all these women who wanted to enter. So the women said, we will storm the temple, and the priests said, we will not allow women in unless there is a machine that can detect that they're menstruating. Okay?
And not,
Or not.
So, or they're not menstruating. So I was like, okay, so that immediately kind of gave me an idea, because that year, the theme so Global Game Jam has a theme every year. So that year the theme was ritual. So this worked out really well.
Yeah.
So I basically created this game that was a bit like Temple Run, where you had priests on each floor. You had these women who would be like trying to run past them and like dodge them, and every now and then one red light would go on because to show they were menstruating. So this game was played by everyone at the jam, and at that point in 2016. The numbers were 54 men, 3 women at the game jam. I'm very glad to report that has improved considerably in the last few years. But yeah, so all the guys were like, oh cool, yeah, nice, wow, okay. And that was it. And then it got picked up and shown at an exhibition, and then all hell broke loose. Like, you know, it was covered by various places, but obviously it was also very controversial. And I think one thing that I think is interesting when it comes to art is that in a way, the gatekeeping of the white cube can allow certain things that might be controversial. So Swagata Bhattacharya, whose game might be mentioned here in the Khoj bit, very, very talented speculative fictions video game person who made this really fantastic looking and playable dystopic future for India game, which has not again been published, but it has been released as an art game. And the reason is simply because like he would actually stand to make money if a publisher was brave enough to take up the game. But there's nobody in this country who would be, because it's incredibly subversive. But yeah, so I think it's also the environment in India kind of is a bit chilling effect, right? Like people are nervous about making games about certain things that are kind of clear in the allegories that they're trying to push. Okay, shall we?
Yeah, I guess kind of, well, if maybe if anyone has any questions, then we can kind of take some. Okay, brilliant.
You want the mic?
Yeah, okay.
Well, if you want one, here is one. But well.
Yeah, it's a question of Indian games.
Okay.
Which has been quite a thing. When we think of Western games, we think of them as games, right?
Yeah, okay.
So I wonder at what point we are at, in the sense of, do we want Indian games to be Indian games, or do we want them to be games that have
Appreciated on the world stage?
I have a question in return. Who's the we here? When you say do we, then who is the we? This is a fundamental question. And I think maybe also Prabhash and Padmini both have talked about Indian games and what is the Indian way that we are constructing. See, I tried to write about games in India, and I ended up writing about video games in the Indian subcontinent because, actually it would be South Asia or whatever. But I included, well, except for Myanmar, where I had no data, and it was also in the middle of COVID, so there was no way I could, even go there. But more or less, even the Maldives, really. So, and it's very interesting to see the kind of relations that you have. Let's say, I'm forgetting the game from Maldives which I featured really, but the people, the kind of culture that is featured there, and what kind of or let's say in Sri Lanka, for example, or Bangladesh. Bangladesh has this, and of course then this is India. And when Padmini talked about Darshan Diversion and also the dystopic game, that there is also the other kind of I'm just going to bring up like some other examples like Studio Oleomingas, which makes this fantastic series of games, again Guggenheim type kind of, they're in museums everywhere. But so there is somewhere this game where you are this British kind of officer who's reading this kind of account of a group of people in a fictitious place called Kayamgarh. The people don't speak because they're afraid that if they speak, their identities are going to be lost because they hear you. So it's kind of like a colonialism kind of thing. And then there is another game where you are a public official who just eats up buildings. And I constantly think of the Kolkata Municipal Corporation, right? And so this is all these kind of things that come in. And then what is the Indian game? What is the reality, and who are we who's the we here? This is perhaps one kind of thing I would like to kind of put out here. And maybe, who wants to go first? Okay, brilliant.
So, yeah, that question is extremely important. We have to think about what Indian games mean. Now, I mentioned that the constitution doesn't apply, but Indian games perhaps do mean a space where where Indian politics gets a voice, perhaps where we raise issues which are pertinent to India. Maybe that can be an Indian game rather than producing something which is either indigenously produced or some folk culture has been mined in order to produce that game. So maybe that is one way of looking at it. Maybe the games that are played in India. For me, I'm an ethnographer, so I interview gamers and I talk to them. For them, it doesn't matter whether video games are art or not. And it doesn't matter whether it's produced in India or not. What they play is what they play, and they play in very indigenized ways. Like when they play Tekken, they would have their own language of playing Tekken. Like they would say, Paul's Fire Fist is called Hawa, or then there will be throws which will be called Patkis. They are directly borrowing from the wrestling repertoire, right? So the ways of gameplay can be Indian or Korean or something, and then we can think about that. But producing a game which is Indian, I don't know. I don't even think games belong to nation states. That's a philosophical question. We need to think about, do games belong to nation states, and what are the criteria for that? Do they own copyrights? What do they do?
So I think for me, like, I'm quite cynical about the moniker of Indian, right? I really feel like it's something that, especially because it's been the sleeping giant for so long, it's really a way to sell, in the absence of the merit of the game. I think like Indian is just like a tag that's being used for it. I think it's also, again, quite cynically ties into things like, the United Nations has these like video game challenge or whatever. So for those kinds of contexts, I think it doesn't make sense, but I think that's why it is deployed. But I think, what you were just saying about, like, does Indian politics figure? Like, I was thinking like Assassin's Creed, right? Like, each episode is some country's history, right? Like, so it doesn't have to be made here to be meaningfully Indian, and I personally don't think it matters, but I feel like because we're very nascent and we haven't really thought through how to make Indian games, kind of accessible to a world stage, that's why it's even, talked about. But I feel like it's a question that hopefully will disappear.
I'm just going to quickly add like a couple of things to this sentence, which is, I just remembered because Prabhash was talking about Tekken. So when I was researching these games, I came across this really popular game in northern India. It was called Mustafa. So I tried looking everywhere. I couldn't find Mustafa anywhere.
Like a video game?
Yeah. And then I realized it was Cadillacs and dinosaurs. And there was a character, and they appropriated it as that was. And then I would also then want to ask, is Max Payne an Indian game? Because everybody at a certain generation, more people than they were in Finland played that game. And they internalized the stories there. So then this issue about boundaries kind of comes in.
Also, our driving is pretty similar.
Okay, maybe the parking simulators as well. So this is, I think, kind of where it becomes fuzzy, really, what's the Indian game, if there is one that is, if it matters at all, yeah. So I guess. Yeah.
PUBG is an Indian game, though.
PUBG
is an Indian game.
Of course.
You make it Indian rather than make it Indian.
That's what.
Yeah, I was wondering when this name would come up.
From 4G.
Yes.
Just building on this, have you felt that developers in India have banged on the fact that they're Indian rather than actually accomplishing feats in the industries?
Yes, I mean.
Have you made a better FPS? Have you made a better adventure game? Or have you just marketed as I'm exotic and Indian?
Correct.
Yeah, so if you look at Raji, the paper on Raji here, the chapter, I keep saying paper. Raji is the subtitle is Raji, an Indian epic, in ancient Indian epic or something. And there is kind of a very critical kind of chapter here by Soraya Murray. I'd leave you to read it. But would you want to? I just want to chip in with this because it's. But there are obviously this kind of there is this thing about kind of developers wanting to address this. But there are many developers who don't really, who are not kind of just doing this, but. Or trying to establish a certain identity. You mentioned Fauji, which didn't really happen somehow, right?
Yeah.
I mean, it has to, but you just threw the ball into
now
here.
You should tell the government funding people. Now you need Fauji.
Well, I will tell them that thing. But they're actually making basically for for Indian heritage, and that's one thing. I mean, there's again the whole question kind of comes up there, but. Looking at a game called Fauji, which is supposed to replace PUBG, Right, and then there is this kind of Akshay Kumar, very famously promo, and apparently they released the cover of Fauji, which was actually photoshopped, which was actually taken from without even having made the game.
Yeah.
So there is that kind of the game that didn't exist really, which became the game. So what is the Indian game? The absent game that you know, or so there's all kinds of issues that come up. But when you ask about developers, obviously, I mean, I'm not a developer myself. I mean, Padmini more so.
I'm more a designer, but I work with
But you work with developers, and I think maybe you will be better placed to comment on this.
So I feel like, you know, going back to what I was saying very early on about like expertise, right? Like we do have the expertise and we have excellent developers here, but often those developers will be lured away by a AAA rather than make their own game, and you know that's understandable because of money. But I also feel like our educational institutions are also not kind of like there's a handful, and when they're teaching game design, it's only technical, right?
Oh,
like nobody's really
yes.
teaching narrative design, or you know even the kind of debates about narratology versus ludology and all of these
Oh,
things.
I tried to pitch narrative design for this funding,
Right.
and it was chucked out. Everything else was brought in.
So it's all about skills,
Yeah.
skilling for
Yeah.
India, etc. So yeah, so I feel like the India thing is and as you're saying, I feel like there are many people who don't really care and they want their work to kind of just stand on its own merit. But I think those are very very few. So yeah.
Yeah, can I?
Yeah, oh, Prabhash, sorry,
It's very curious that you asked that, right? I haven't seen anybody else on the planet who is an Indian and still trying to be an Indian. You see, so that whole thing that we do, that Indian developers trying to be Indian, it comes from some other place.
Right.
Whose Indian do you want to be?
Correct.
That is a
Exactly.
question that you need to ask.
Who is the ideal Indian citizen?
Most of the games we play are like for entertainment, pure entertainment. But my question is related to that kind of smaller genre, perhaps, which has to do with simulation. And you know, you see some of these games come up. Of course, simulation is used in a big way. Let's say in real life industry, like airplane training, or sometimes even used in cricket. You know.
There's also a goat simulator. Seriously.
But also used in surgery
Yeah.
as well to teach.
I'm
surgical
curious
techniques.
about that whole, you know, application of games,
Yeah.
and because I was reading today about this whole cognitive mental model where, you know, if you repeat action words, then action happens in the same areas of the brain.
Right.
And simulation also is so powerful. You know, whether things like we had these games come up for farming and then, you know, cooking. These are skills we're losing like a lot of. Like I used to play this game called Design Home, which I loved because I never really have a real home to design. So I used to like, it used to be quasi pleasure, but they do build real life skills. So I'm very curious about that whole simulation and role play. And there are any studies to map, you know, game behavior to real life. And since you mentioned 4G, it also triggered, you know, this kind of rather weird question about, do you think the wars of the future will be all video games?
They already are. Drone warfare is like playing a video game.
Completely video games, like without the real life.
There's actually a video game where you can
Where
do
you can,
that.
where you are playing
The drone up. So I know we're kind of so I'm just very quickly going to start off on this, and I think Padmini will like where I'm going. I think you know, when you talk about simulation, simulations are not vanilla pure. There is something called an algorithmic bias, and there is a game called City Skylines which teaches architects all over the world how to design cities. And it actually, I've been writing on this, it actually follows a Le Corbusierian model. And if you think Chandigarh is a perfect city, then I'll rest my case here. But so there are fundamental problems with that kind of radial architecture or whatever. So with games, let's say if you take a game like Civilization, which is to simulate civilization, then there's a big, huge problem. So what kind of parameters are being coded into the game is also, I think, really important when you think of simulators. And again, when you said who's Indian, and I would also say who's simulator, who is actually being, is it made for people in a particular geography, particular ethnicity, so on and so forth. So these, I think, are fundamental issues when you bring in simulations. But we actually certainly sometimes tend to rely on simulators quite a lot and accept them as givens. But I don't think a flight simulator for Dam Dam Airport and a flight simulator for Heathrow should be the same thing. But well, I'll leave to, yeah.
And like along those lines, like I have a very strong kind of cast critique about simulation games, because it's like especially Indian players like loving Farmville and cleaning up kitchens just seems amazingly funny to me, because they're not doing that, and they probably never will generationally. So I think but I think there is something there about, of course, achievement, right? I mean, it's like that dopamine hit, etc. And I think the one difference might be that a simulation is actually not a gamification, right? Like, so that is a difference, because to gamify something is to abstract it, right? And to make it a winnable, whereas to simulate is to like literally like do the thing, right? Like, so there shouldn't be a win condition. Like, yes, you've landed the plane, but that's not, I mean, right now this is a very controversial topic. You've not killed the patient, whatever. Right?
Too soon.
But it's not, I don't think of it as gamified. I think of a simulation in a slightly different space. Yeah.
There's also the issue of agency, but I'll let Prabhash kind of,
No, your question is very fascinating, because both parts of your question come from the same history. That is the history of game theory and Rand Corporation, where cognitive behavior was thought games, simulations were supposed to map the brain in a certain way and to condition people into a certain way. And then there were war simulations through which various simulations were practiced. So if the transfer happens in one area, then the transfer would happen in the other area as well. Like, war would not become video games. Video games would be used for more and more war. If they can map your brain, the logic goes that way. Yeah?
So I think we'll take one more question. I think we're a little, but we can chat. Yeah, I guess we can, in more.
Well, I don't have a question, but like I had a few thoughts about the simulation and the idea of nation states. I follow a bunch of like YouTube channels which cover video games as like art and like sort of socio-political thing. There's one very interesting video say about did Sims make you gay? And it's very interesting because Sims was one of the earliest games which had like the same-sex relationships. Although like the games are not devoid of socio-political like circumstances, so it was still set in like an American suburban household, and like it's stimulating like an American like alienated lifestyle. So even though like it could have a sense of like progressive queerness, it's still like driven from the perspective of like it is following like an American neoliberal perspective of living a nuclear family and not like a communal polycle or whatever. And second idea, sort of thought I had about like the discussion is that like what is the Indian game, right? I think like there is definitely like an Oriental gaze that we sort of like, and I don't say like we as in me, like I'm not there. But the Indian like game makers sort of put it out there for the world. They should like sell themselves as like this Ramayana Mahabharata, as like Padmini has mentioned. But I think like there could be like a critical play beyond that also, which would be happening in smaller pockets here and there. And I think like one of the best examples like of like a critical play I could think of like which deals with the idea of nation states is Disco Elysium. Like I'm sure like the geeks and nerds out here like played it. But like you can have a game which is about like sort of inquiring an idea of nation states without like romanticizing it, but also like like critiquing it and like having a critical sort of gameplay which not giving you answers but like giving you more questions. So I think like video games hold a very crazy amount of potential there. But there are like definitely like other aspects in the Indian context where like the finances are not there. So but like it will happen in tiny small pockets here and there. And I can see it around, so like it's gonna happen inshallah.
Fingers crossed.
It's a good point too.
So
there's one more question. Otherwise, can we take it outside?
So thank you for that kind of really very informed and also optimistic kind of note. And to speak of, where you already kind of mentioned something algorithmic bias in the or kind of code bias in terms of Sims, cultural code, if I'm to say that. There's a fantastic essay by Gonzalo Frasca called "Video Games of the Oppressed," where he talks about mods using mods to in Sims basically to create different kinds of families. Frasca is from Uruguay, so he tries to bring the global South into Sims, and this is way back in the early 2000s. So that's just kind of my, and obviously I totally agree with what you're saying on kind of the pockets, and like you said, hopefully there will be more pockets, and of course. Just as you said, video games leave us with more questions. And as Prabhash started that like a gamer, he said, I'm going to leave you with more questions. So that's kind of, there we are already kind of playing this game. So I'll just leave it to that, just your responses. No? Yeah. Prabhash, more questions?
No, yeah, kind of like, I was just thinking about what you said in terms of critical play. It's a curious set of words. Play is kind of always thought to be critical, autocritical to certain extent, and then there is critical play. Just because we see critical play around us doesn't mean that critical play is going to spread. First, secondly, there is a huge technological divide as well. Who is playing criticality and who has the right to criticality through video games is something we need to take seriously as well. That would be my closing remark. Yeah.
So I guess we can now take our questions. Yep. And please read the articles. This is fantastic, and it's really well designed. I mean, I'm like totally into the designers and Marg. Like, So, so I'm really glad that this has come to happen. I think you are too, Jyotsna, after many dialogues which went on for almost a year. And hopefully I'll be seeing this in more college libraries and and other places where, it was, video games didn't reach earlier. So thanks a lot. So I don't know.
You can see it in your own library because you can pick it up outside. That's the easiest way to do it. But thank you, all three of you, for being here. And of course, thank you, Atta, Galatta, for giving us this space, and for all of you for turning up. I was convinced everybody was stuck in traffic, so I'm glad you guys made it. And of course, Marg is a non-profit, so we're supported by a lot of people. PNP Pariba, the Harish and Dina Shah Foundation, and TVS also helped make this volume possible. And like Souvik said, I'm hoping this is the first of many. And I hope some of you all will also write for us at some point, reflecting about video games after this conversation. So
these questions might become articles themselves.
Yes. Make notes and send it to me. All right, thank you all.
Thank you so much.
Thanks for all the great questions and your participation. Yeah, it's fascinating.
Another one now.
Had to end on a pessimistic note.